So we've all heard the talks about monks being OP. I was recommended a video, I haven't watched it yet. This is by DaveHun, and he's talking about monks. I know Hero did a video as well where he's talked about monks, and the uproar about monks is quite big because you also have the new fortified churches and monk warriors. Sorry, warrior priests is the correct name. So apparently there was a good video here by DaveHun. So let's do it.
Monks. Perhaps the most misunderstood unit in this game. There are a lot of misconceptions around them. But in a lot of communities nowadays, it's a pretty widespread belief that monks are either overpowered or need some kind of nerf. And while many of the arguments seem to make sense on the surface, I will try to explain why I think they are not justified once we look at the facts.
By the way, for those who aren't aware, this is a 19-minute video, so it's quite long. But yeah, he's speaking quite low, and I cannot turn the volume up higher.
Number 1. Converting an enemy unit not only removes them from the opponent, but gives you an additional unit to work with.
Yeah, it's essentially the power swing, right? That's why war elephants are so, in quotes, bad. Because you convert a war elephant, they are so expensive, they're so strong. And if that unit, first of all, the cost, that switches side, but also the stats switches side. So it's just the power swing is super hard in a conversion.
This makes monks excellent in scenarios where the armies are small, but high in value, such as elephants, knights, rambai, war wagons, Mangodai, and so on.
Agreed.
Number 2. Healing. The healing benefit means that taking equal trades against them is not sufficient because monks can replenish losses on units that didn't die.
True.
Number 3. Only gold cost.
Mm-hmm.
This can obviously be a drawback when gold runs low. However, in early and mid game, typically it's an available resource, and having villagers on gold requires little to no effort. Number 4.
He's essentially saying the economy required for monks is a clown economy. That's what he's saying.
Ability to convert enemy monks, siege, or buildings. If your civ does have access to these stacks, it can be a powerful tool in dealing with these units or neutralizing siege defense and converting defenseless buildings.
I mean, converting monk siege buildings, also the heavy trick there is the switching the conversion from a building to a unit, for example, to keep the conversion juice and pretty much get an instant conversion. Now they're changing that in the new DLC, or with the new patch that is coming with the DLC. So that's going to be a serious nerf to the whole monk snowball on buildings. So when you switch from a building to a unit, the whole monk conversion charge should be reset.
To be garrisoned inside TCs, castles. This makes defending with them easier in a certain area if enemy units decide to dive in.
That's true.
Moving on to cons now. Slow, immobile unit.
True.
A very obvious drawback, and one that greatly reduces their usability with the distance traveled increasing. If the fight is not happening where the monks are, good luck getting them where they need to be.
You're also just very exposed, right? If you get caught off guard and you don't start converting in time, you can lose so many monks for free, right? It's like a very high attention requiring unit. Like, you need to be so attentive to the unit at all times, no matter where you are on the map, because it can be the difference between winning the game or losing the game, or keeping 5 or 10 vills alive versus losing 5 or 10 vills. It's massive.
Number 2. Fragile. Lacking any powerful stats, monks are an easy target for many units. Number 3. Always needs micro.
Oh, I realized I'm
So
blocking the
most
com
units
list.
that will do their own thing, even if you don't micro them at all, monks will just sit there and die unless you command them to convert units. This means they cannot be left out of sight when the opponent decides to attack, demanding very good game sense from the monk player to not look away at the wrong moments. Number 4. Slow production.
Which is an argument for, like, number 3. This is a big argument for monks require a lot of skill, which is true, but still.
51 seconds is a long time for a single unit to be made. Just for comparison's sake, the slowest producing unique unit, the Mangodai, is created in 26 seconds.
Yes, but also monks are usually a unit that you don't want to make 40 of. So yeah. Wait, whose side if the monk is on? You mean, like, he's just arguing both sides here. I don't think he's like biased in either way. He's just presenting all the pros and cons, and he's sharing his take. But it seems like his take is monks are not OP, because that's what the title of the video is.
5. poor scalability. Monks are also an exceptional unit compared to most others, and this is strongly related to the micro aspect. It might be easy to micro 3, 4, 5 monks. However, the more you have, the more difficult it gets to get the same effective value out of them, as we are limited by just how fast we can click them.
That is true.
Until Theocracy, the aspect of multiple monks losing faith on a single target also limits the usability of monks once they reach the double digits. Sure, you can get 3 out of 3 conversions against 3 knights, but can you get 30 out of 30 converts against 30 knights in Castle Age? You would need insanely good micro to get even half.
That's where the argument is that monks are the best unit of the game if controlled by AI. Is if the AI could provide perfect monk micro, an army of only monks would be the best army in the game, essentially. Now, the thing with monks is that they're not supposed to be your main army. They're supposed to be a support unit. The monk is the thing that makes your other units shine or lets the other units do the damage, and the threat that if your opponent tries to engage that army, he might lose his army and it might snowball out of control.
On the topic of a certain unit being OP, I think it can be essentially be broken down to 2 categories. One would be in a broader sense, applying to many settings and maps. For example, pre-nerf crossbows come to mind. The second category would be related to a more specific setting, like pre-nerf Janissaries in 1v1 arena, or conks on Nomad. I do believe there is room for a unit being overpowered even if it's only related to a certain setting, and no singular unit should be as dominant. I won't go into the details of the mentioned units here, they only serve as examples. Do we think monks fit the bill for either of these 2 categories? For the answer?
Overpowered across many settings. I don't think monks are overpowered across many settings. They're just like never ever a bad choice or a bad decision, and they always have utility and potential to serve you in the game. Overpowered in a specific setting, potentially, but also, I mean, there's always countermeasures to take, right? But I would say they're overpowered in a setting if you get into a certain position. That's obviously like, then you were able to get into that position to begin with, so.
Let's take a look at the most ideal setting for monks. The latest Masters of Arena tournament. With the map script having 1800 HP stone walls already in Feudal Age, means that feudal play is pretty much out of the game, only fast castle. Monks thrive on low economy settings, so that's a checkmark. Short distance to the opponent, check. Having a safe stone wall base, so being immobile is less of an issue, check. Needing less macro and a small economy, check.
Check.
Ability to counter many of the high value unique units we tend to see on
Let me guess.
check.
Check.
The chance to force fights in one place, check. The chance to focus mostly on army, therefore having fewer moments to look away, check. Now we could think that with all these aspects factored in, monks would have absolutely dominated the tournament. But that was not the case at all. Which was the most common opening instead? Light Cav. The only sets where the majority of the games were not Light Cav and Boom were in the Silver League, where many players simply didn't care that much about playing the ideal opening. So it seems that even in the most favorable settings, monks are not the strongest unit.
But that's also because, I think in Master Arena, majority of the players that made it far were not clown players, no offense, but also like Light Cav is the safer approach because they counter monks and they give you map control and time to react in case there is a push. So more often than not, depending on the Civ matchup, people now draft Civs more for the transitions to late game rather than the monk play, right? Because that's just a safer play. So I think it's very hard to gauge the, like, what's the actual more impactful thing here. But like me personally, I would probably play Light Cav 7 or 8 times out of 10 just because it's safer and I would feel more comfortable doing it rather than going for the risky all-in monk strategy. Even though I still think the risky all-in monk strategy should be and could be very strong, it's just slightly safer playing Light Cav. Not sure if that's an argument though for like, oh, monks are not OP because people are not taking the risky play over the safe play, you know? So it's a little bit different.
We could argue that Light Cav being so prevalent on Arena is because of the strength of the monks. However, this does not make them overpowered in any way, since they do have their counters. Now whether this makes the games have less variety overall is a different topic. The fact is, Light Cavs have dominated every single arena tournament in the last couple of years, and nerfing monks is not going to help that issue at all.
I think the arena meta has been figured out. That's why it's like that, right? People aren't complaining about monks in arena. People are complaining about monks everywhere else. Arena is not the problem because you start behind walls and you have time to react and adapt to dealing with monks. By, for example, going light cap. Arena is the least. It's one of the maps where it's the most potentially powerful to play monks, but at the same time, it's also the map where people are preparing for monks the most. Therefore, obviously, the risk of going monks is also way higher. There's like a balance here where it's like, yes, but also this and that. So therefore, you know. But yeah, so far, structured video, very well structured and explained, and unbiased presentation of the situation from both sides. So I like it so far.
Let's consider the other maps. Whenever monks are used with success, it's almost always in combination with some other units.
Yes.
Whether it's cavalry plus monks, pike siege monks, or crossbow monks, the key point is, depending on the opponent's army composition, you will need to protect the monks. Light cav and crossbows are both quite effective at sniping monks, and we can add pikes and siege units respectively to counteract this. Is it fair to say that monks combined with pikes and siege is overpowered? Well, I don't think that's the case. Even if it was, we are talking about 3 different units at this point, all requiring extensive amounts of micro, while being a very slow army to move around.
True.
A lot of the complaints I heard about monks is in regards to making cavalry play harder. When we have a player with crossbows against a player with knights in early Castle Age, the crossbow player adding some monks makes it difficult for the knights to find a good engagement. But now we are back to the previous argument. We have an army composition of monks and crossbows countering a singular unit type, knights. It can also cause frustration when playing cavalry against a fully walled opponent, as monks from behind walls can deter cavalry easily.
Yes, there's also an argument here that the cavalry play is really shut down because you cannot even go and raid. Even if the crossbows are on the other side of the map, let's say the crossbows are non-existent even. You send 2 or 3 knights to try and raid a woodline or farms or whatever. The second you hear that volo sound, you have to run away. There's a multi-purpose way of shutting down knight play, not just in pure engagement terms, but you kind of prevent the opponent from the chance of properly raiding you as well in many ways.
I would argue this applies to most cases where the ranged units are behind walls against melee units. Scouts trying to break in versus walled archers, or knights trying to break in against walled crossbows is in principle the same issue. So I believe this has more to do with walls being strong in general. Some argued maybe monks shouldn't be able to be garrisoned in TCs, as it makes it difficult for the knight player to dive in. I think this is a similar situation to when the defending player is on crossbows, which can jump into TCs all the same, while also making the TCs themselves stronger. The thing is, knights diving TCs often has to be a big commitment, because against both crossbows and monks, you need enough damage dealt to justify the losses. Combine this with high-level players being extremely good with quick walling, this makes knights diving TCs a really difficult task, regardless of monks. There were games where players using redemption monks seemed too strong to some viewers because one player ended up converting a bunch of buildings with no resistance. I believe there is a bit of survivorship bias in effect here, because there are plenty of games where redemption simply doesn't pay off nearly as much.
That's also very true. That's where it's like the snowball effect. You're very much more likely to remember a game where someone snowballed the game out of control due to redemption and monks, rather than the game where he made 4 monks, they all died, and the game went on, you know.
And even in the cases where it does, it's a pretty massive cost to spend early castle with 475 gold, and 175 gold on top of that to get sanctity as well, as you don't want to get one-shot by siege. Add to that the necessity to make at least 2 monasteries so you can get the text researched and monks created on time. Redemption is not a tech you can just pick up whenever you feel like. Often we see players losing a bunch of buildings to redemption monks, but it's because they have lost complete control of the game already, and the opponent having 4 rams taking out buildings would be similarly terrible for less of a cost than redemption monks. Also, if you're using redemption defensively, it might help to deter the enemy mangonels, but once you do, there is absolutely no guarantee that you can use redemption aggressively, as the opponent might have an army that completely counters yours.
It's also a problem potentially in like a cavalry war. Let's say both players open knights in Castle Age. If the other guy is, let's say he's just playing a regular macro game, adding town centers, economy, and then you have the other guy going like full knights, and then he also adding like double monastery full monks to it as well. Then your knights can never engage. You have to try and switch to light cav to snipe his monks, but he might do redemption fast, and suddenly you're faced with a situation where stables are being sieged by the knights, and then he starts converting them as well, and that situation kind of snowballs out of control.
There are also complaints about so-called instant conversions as well.
Yes.
I know the term is not meant to be taken literally, but since the minimum conversion time is roughly 5 in-game seconds, the only cases where you lost units too early, resulting in a bad engagement, or lost units to conversions while running away, are simply player mistake. Even factoring in human reaction times and all that, if you pull units away on time, they will not get converted even with the worst luck. And if you can't afford to lose units to faster conversions in a fight, fact is you couldn't afford to take the fight to begin with. Do not engage unless you are fully ready to commit. I will explain in my next point why taking fights against monks is a little different than against most other units.
It is true what he's saying. It's more often than not, it's human error. But there can also still be that RNG range that impacts, like you'll say, okay, on average, it takes this amount of time to convert. But then if like 3 out of the 4 conversions were super fast, suddenly that's not necessarily only down to the human mistake, right?
Because of conversions increasing the DPS of an army and healing after fights making up for the HP losses, it is not advised to take many small trades against monks, since after every fight they fully heal everything, and you might be giving them new units with every try.
Yeah.
If the monks convert half your army or more, the fight will likely already be decided, since the opponent has the same DPS, but with monks also healing them. For example, it's generally not advised to fight 5 Sanctity monks with just 4 light cav, since if you lose 2 of them to conversions, which is likely, then the momentum of the opponent's push is only increasing.
Maybe that's statistically correct, but I would always feel like if I have 4 light cav and I see 5 monks, I would jump on it immediately. Even if he gets a conversion or 2, I would feel like, okay, the fact, sure, he gets 1 or 2 light cavs to his side, but if you kill 3 or 4 of them in return, I'm still happy with that, because the monks are more scary to me than him having 2 extra light cav.
Better off waiting and massing more if you can.
Yeah, obviously.
The scalability of monks is not great. They will likely not get a conversion with every monks once the armies are in higher numbers. And taking an engagement with roughly equal resources should result in an easy cleanup for light cavs.
But sometimes you're forced to take a fight.
An aspect that I want to mention for this topic is the longevity of feudalage, or rather the lack thereof in the recent meta. There are a bunch of maps to consider, of course, but let's consider the semi-open maps, especially Arabia. It has become a rare sight to see extended feudal age armies. This results in players entering Castle Age faster, with a weaker economy and fewer units.
Yeah.
Monks, as we mentioned, thrive on low economy and against low numbers of high-value units.
True.
And that high-value unit is so often knights. So of course, monks can get great value there. Now let's consider an opposite example. Let's say a typical game of Acropolis, Atacama or Land Madness, where extended feudal age fights are common, which results in usually some type of leftover army leading into Castle Age. If you have 8 scouts or 15 archers leading into Castle Age, there is very little relevance for monks at that point. Even skirmisher armies can kinda negate the threat of monks. The players enter Castle Age with armies that already counter monks, with economies that allow multiple units to form a composition instead of a 35 villager economy supporting low numbers of knights. So maybe the higher prevalence of monks in recent times is more of a map issue.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think even in a situation prolonged feudal age, mixing in monks is never going to be a bad choice, or it's something you're avoiding. You're still going to make monks even if the guy has leftover army, 5 scouts, 15 skirms, you're still going to want to probably mix in monks here and there. First of all, pick up relics. Secondly, heal your army. Thirdly, try to convert units. It's never going to be a bad choice, right? I don't necessarily agree with that it's a map problem per se. But yeah, let's carry on.
If the so-called open maps would actually play out aggressive, then monks would be much less relevant. Another topic to mention is knights versus pikemen. This has sparked some debate already. Do pikes actually counter knights or vice versa? And the answer greatly depends on when. Because if we take the previous example of short feudal age into knights, then Pikes might not work very well against them. Pikes are a trash unit, they need to be upgraded, and trash units typically prefer to be massed before we hit the next stage. In a short feudal age, spears are unlikely to be massed, since there is no reason to. Therefore, low numbers of knights can take effective trades against low number of pikes, and only later, when the economy can sustain mass production of pikes, does that change. How does this relate to monks? Well, in early Castle Age, if feudal age was short, monks are a preferred option as a counter to knights, precisely because monks are a low economy unit best used against low numbers of units. Whereas pikes are a better long-term investment that scale way better against cavalry. Removing either of these options would mean that knights don't have an effective counter at one or more stages of the game. Also, there are games where the defending player has no other option but to make monks in order to survive. For example, against only knights, siege pushes, or perhaps the best example I can give is facing conquistadors on Nomad. Nomad allows for very low eco pushes, which makes some of the unique units very strong, since they require little to no upgrades to be powerful. If we were to remove monks as an option there would be a lot of games where conks, or other strong unique units, simply have no counterplay at all. I've heard the argument that recently in pro games, monks are used very often, one way or another. I really don't see how that makes the unit overpowered though, since they are usually a support unit. The only maps where monks can be a main unit are the likes of Arena, Socotra, Fractal, maps where the distance is relatively short and the economies are weak.
I would have to add there, I think there's also some recency bias against monks from Titans League. Titans League map pool had Saval, Fractal, Socotra, even Coast to Mountain could have monk, like transition into like a light cav monk play. There were a lot of maps in Titans League that you saw monks. So people might have a lot more like monks on their mind now as well with that in mind. So there might be some recency bias against monks that we saw them a lot in TTL.
We see monks a lot nowadays. We also see a lot of crossbows, knights, mangonels. Does that mean that these units are all overpowered?
The argument is that people that say we see a lot of monks these days is we didn't see a lot of monks before. That's why the argument like, we see a lot of knights, we see a lot of crossbow. People think that monks have become OP because the meta has changed towards monks. The logic for them doesn't apply that, yeah, we see a lot of crossbows, we see a lot of knights. No, but that's always been the case, you know? So it's a bit different.
We see scouts on Land Madness 95% of the time. Does that mean scouts are overpowered on this map?
It's a weak argument.
It simply means that the meta on this map suits them. Just like how the short feudal age meta on Arabia suits army compositions with monks as supporting units. You can like or dislike the unit, that's your preference and you have every right to it. You can also complain about maps playing out with too little variety. I complain about that too. Not just watching tournaments, but playing the games myself. It is a problem in the game currently. It's not because of monks though. The unit does exactly what it's supposed to.
I just want to point out, if you guys notice the background footage here, he's using the select military only or select economy units only with the mouse drag a lot. To do that, you have to hold Control or Alt. I wonder if he has changed the hotkeys because he's doing it very smoothly. Like when I do it, sometimes when I hold Control to select military units, I will just add different units on top of it. He's doing that very well. This is just a side note.
The problem is the maps encouraging very short feudal ages and walls and rewalling being too difficult to punish. I would like to give a short mention to team games in general as well. Sometimes on Arena Flank there is monk play or on the odd Black Forest game, but other than that, most open maps are just knights and crossbowmen.
Yeah, he said also the odd Black Forest game. No. A lot of Black Forest games.
It's been like that for decades now. It's even more jarring how mixing in any type of other unit actively hurts your chances. So other units, including monks, are just completely out of the equation. Yet somehow, that's not deemed an issue currently.
He is right though. Like monks in team games is not as nearly as prevalent as they are in 1v1.
Most pro players are advocating for some kind of monk nerf. The way I see it is that most players in the top 50 or so actually either haven't voiced their opinion on the topic or they have a neutral stance on the subject. the amount of pros advocating for monk nerfs is definitely not a majority. I've also heard a couple pros mention that monks are not an issue balance-wise, but of course that doesn't gain nearly as much traction as calling something overpowered or broken. And while in general I do agree with the sentiment that the game should be balanced for the pro level, I don't think that pro players' opinions are the only thing that should be taken into consideration, given how, either consciously or subconsciously, you might be advocating for balance changes that suit your style.
Sure.
I think in general we should also be taking into consideration the maps and how they shift the dominant strategies before fundamentally changing one of the core units in the game.
What's the final shout out there? Check out T West's video in the pinned comment to learn about the monk mechanics. He explains it better than I ever could. We will definitely link that ourselves as well. On the last topic he posted, yes, there is a clear thing here where it's like, yes, a lot of the high level players, they make a lot of noise about monks. You have seen Hera, Hart, MBL, Nikov. I'm listening all the AM guys. No, but even I myself as well have voiced my opinion about monks, but I'm more in the boat of the frustrating thing from monks about me is more the RNG aspect. He didn't touch too much on the RNG. He did mention it, that there is a monk range, right? That's where the frustration is for me, at least. The RNG aspect, that a monk can either convert super fast or super slow. And that's where the frustrations still, in my opinion, mostly come from. If monks had a fixed conversion time all the time, every time, everyone would know what to expect, no one would get frustrated about them, and they would be balanced around that very time. But that's not the case. The monks have a range that is random, where it can either be fast or slow or average, whatever, medium, and that's where the problem is. You don't know what to expect, you just know that it can happen this way or that way. Therefore, when it happens the bad way for you, it's really frustrating, because you know it could happen a good way for you. And sometimes you play and you get fast conversions yourself and you're happy. Sometimes you get slow conversions yourself and you're like, how did it take that long? And then you play against someone and he gets, Mr. Yo, instant conversion. And you're just like, this is unfair. Because earlier I did not get an instant conversion. That's where the frustration comes from. And the RNG aspect is the biggest problem. The devs have been already starting to touch monks. Sanctity is more expensive. In the next patch, as I mentioned, the conversion, you cannot switch from building to a unit anymore. So the monk snowball, which is the biggest problem, I don't think monks per se, by default, this is OP. I think the potential of a monk snowball can be extremely OP though. Because if you get one lucky RNG situation, that can snowball into a snowball. You know, the snowball just keeps getting bigger and bigger, right? And that's the thing, that the RNG aspect can be what starts or shuts down that snowball. And again, that's what it all boils down to. That's the problem. And then it's like the question is like, okay, but RNG has been a part of Age of Empires since the dawn of time. And yes, it has been. Maps have had incredibly bad RNG as well. But guess what has happened the last 10, 15 years? Maps have been scripted differently to make it more fair, to make it more balanced, to make less frustration happen. Monks have also been changed. The range, the RNG range, was even bigger if you look back 10 years. They have already changed things like that. But monks are still a unit that frustrates. And again, I come back to it. It's because of the RNG. I have to say though, this video was very, very well structured. I think he had a really good explanation and unbiased presentations of things. I don't agree with everything he said, but I just simply sit here and nod my head to most of it. I don't think it explains, or in the end is a decisive argument for either or. He also mentioned that a lot of top 50 players have not voiced their opinions, but that also doesn't mean that they don't think monks are OP, right? It's like, we don't know. But feedback has been given to a lot of devs, and it's like, what is the right solution? I've heard things like, when you build a monk, he could start with 0 faith. So you have to charge 100% faith or recharge before you can convert from the start. And then there could be a monk technology where you can research it. And after you have done that, let's say it costs 50 gold even. But once you research that, every monk will then spawn with 100 faith. You can have monks have less range and give them an upgrade in castle age. Let's say you have a monk, the monk have 7 range by default. A 75 gold upgrade to give them 9 range. There's these small things that you can force them to take one extra step to make them as useful as they are right now, which I think that is probably more the direction I would like them to take, rather than completely changing the unit in any other way. Now, I don't think monks are super OP. I don't think they're super broken, but I wouldn't mind seeing small things like that added, just to have them have to take one more step to reach their potential. Look at archers or crossbows. They still need to get like armor, bodkin arrow, thumb ring, ballistics to be fully utilized. Nice, they still need armor, +2 armor, bloodlines, husbandry. There's still a lot of upgrades you need to do in order for them to reach their potential. You can argue the same with monks. They need sanctity, they need faith, not fervor, yes. But I think their power spike is still mostly in their range, that they can convert a unit from 9 range. I also would like to see monks lose the charge completely if a unit goes out of range. Right now we still have the thing where they kind of continue to chase a little bit, and they don't necessarily lose the range. But again, shout out to DaveHun. There will be a link in the description to his video if you want to check it out and give some comments there as well. Also to TheVest's video about the mechanics of monks. DaveHun is not Dave, no. I'm wondering if I want to check Hero's video as well. I think it's a 9-minute video.